Can you tell a bit more about yourself? Like how did you start out, and what brought you to this?
Yeah, so we met at the 2015 TIFF Talent Lab, and at the time we were both just making our own short films, but we were secretly looking, I think, for a collaborator. And we started making short films together as a writing directing team, and we realized for the first time how much we actually enjoyed filmmaking.
Yeah, it was kind of the first time we had fun on set making a film, rather than just kind of the stress of it all and then waiting until the film is finished to feel happy about it. It was just fun the whole time, which was a new experience for both of us.
Yeah, and our friendship was really founded on our shared history of abuse and trauma in our past. And so we started opening up to each other about our own personal experiences. And then we started experimenting with our short films, trying to talk about issues surrounding abuse and trauma. And then it really all culminated in the writing and production of Violation. It's a really personal film for the both of us. And we were really trying to capture a visceral experience for the audience that mimics the post-traumatic stress that the body goes through when dealing with residual trauma, and trying to create a feeling that captures the way the past can be triggering, and how it could bring us back to this moment, the way the past and the present kind of speak to one another.
I miss you.
So the movie was actually filmed in line with the interests of both of you. Like, you both had a very strong feeling with the theme you were working on.
Yeah, we both, we kind of mined both of our personal histories. Like Dusty said, we both had traumatic experience in our pasts, and sort of just melded them together and excavated the feelings that we both had and put that all into Violation.
Yeah, and I think primarily, we were so used to seeing within this subgenre of the rape revenge film, this idea of wish fulfillment, this cathartic release, that we romanticize revenge. And it's this problematic notion that the only way a victim could be made whole again is by destroying their perpetrator. And we just were far more interested in what is the actual grisly nature of revenge, and what is the cost? What does it do to someone's morality, and how can it corrode your relationships and the fabric of who you are? And from our experiences, we noticed that abuse is more common within your friends or your family, people that are close to you, rather than this portrayal of the nefarious, dangerous stranger in an alleyway, which of course that exists, but it's far more common. We have found that abuse will occur in the least likely places with the people that you trust,
which also makes it so much more complicated and difficult to deal with. And I think we're so used to seeing films end with the revenge, and we just thought, well, what happens afterwards? When this person has gotten their revenge, how does that make them feel? What do they do after? That was really kind of what sparked the idea.
Yeah, so it's almost that the revenge becomes a traumatization in the film itself, that we see how that act is unraveling Miriam's emotional, psychological being, and
eroding her sense of humanity.
Yeah, and really the film is designed to scare you into not wanting to seek revenge. And I think we were trying to scare ourselves, not wanting to seek revenge, because if you've gone through something similar to this, it's very easy to fantasize and get caught up in this idea of vengeance and making yourself feel like that's going to get rid of this thing that has happened to you. And we don't think that's a healthy way of dealing with trauma. And so for us, it was more about really focusing on the ways in which a person is really undone by the revenge, and designing it around a cautionary tale. It's Miriam, unfortunately, does not learn the lesson that she needs to learn in time. And there's something tragic, but yet beautiful, and being able to portray that.
To you. Yeah, I miss what we used to be like.
I definitely want to say bravo, Madeleine, for your performance. It was like it left me speechless. I honestly have just seen the movie 2 hours ago, so I'm still very, very under the impression of it. And it is true that the emotion sticks, that you achieved to instill that fear on the viewer. So there is a logical sequence, as in you have the abuse, you have the revenge, and then you have the results of that revenge portraying on the relationships. But why, if you have that order that is quite specific, why did you decide to shuffle it up and change the chronological order of the movie altogether?
Yeah, thank you for what you said about the performance. It was definitely a crazy undertaking in so many ways, particularly the emotional toll that it took, I think was massive. But there were several reasons that we wanted to tell the story in a non-linear way. One thing that we have become really interested in together in our collaboration is this idea of recontextualizing characters and having the audience see a character a certain way, and then kind of taking you to another place where you realize that's the reason that they were behaving that way, or the judgment that you formed about them is not quite whole because you don't know the entire story. So then we give you a little bit more of the story and a bit more, and hopefully it kind of forces you to think differently about these people, and to realize that you've judged them in a certain way.
Yeah, and really it's structured around Miriam's emotional psychological unraveling, and you can hopefully see that at its heart it's a story about these two sisters, and it's how one sister really lets down another, and it's structured in a way where we're seeing why Miriam does what she does, how she feels forced into making the choices that she makes because she's incredibly alienated. She doesn't find the support she's looking for from her sister or her husband or her brother-in-law. And so we see her retreating, her withdrawal, and eventually the aftermath of what she does. And so really it's about getting the audience to hopefully empathize and understand Miriam and the choices that she makes.
That's when Dad started calling you my white knight. Brainwashed her.
He just doesn't do everything you say anymore.
And I wanted to ask you about the shooting itself, because you choose the location in a very natural, outdoorsy place, and you must have been depending on the weather changes. So how did that go?
Well, we're from Toronto, and we decided to film the movie in the mountains in Quebec, which is about 6.5 hours from
north of where we are.
Yeah, so we drove up with the crew and the cast, and we didn't have a lot of money, and we knew we wanted to really try to showcase the kind of raw power and beauty of nature, and trying to find very specific, foreboding pine trees and these really powerful waterfalls to really help create a mood and atmosphere for the film.
Quebec is very mountainous and very wild, and where we are from is very flat and very kind of tamed. So it was really, we wanted to shoot in this place that just felt like complete wilderness.
Yeah, so we prepped for 1 month, and then we shot for 2 months with all natural light, and that was really tricky and challenging. We did lots of camera tests where we would set up, like put a camera in the woods from 5 a.m. until 7 p.m. and we would document the light. So we had a really clear vision of, what were the windows of time in which we would be able to get the exact look of the film that we wanted. And that meant having a really complex shooting schedule where we sometimes would film one scene over multiple days. So for example, the strangulation sequence in the film, that it's a long 10-minute sequence, we shot that over the course of 5 days consecutively because we knew we had a small little window of light around 4 hours where we were going to be able to keep that consistency. And then we would spend the morning prepping and rehearsing and doing these really beautiful choreographies so that by the time the light window appeared, we were ready to film. We could just go into it.
In terms of the weather, we were totally at its mercy. When we shot the lake scene with my character and Anna's character swimming across the lake, we shot that for about 16 hours because the weather just kept changing. So we shot it in the morning. We started shooting it around 5 in the morning, right when the sun was coming up, and there was this beautiful mist on the lake. And then we shot it in the afternoon when the sun was at its peak and it was quite windy and the water was really choppy. And then we shot it again at sunset. And we ended up only using stuff from the end of the day.
Nice, so cold.
And you mentioned being dependent on the light and the natural light. You use a very specific color palette in scenes that matches the emotional load that scene carries. Did you think of that in advance, or did you just see the light and then decided to just go with what you feel at that moment?
It's a great question. We spent a lot of time pre-visualizing the film and really looking at other film references that utilize natural light to find a color palette for the film. And then we worked really closely with our cinematographer, Adam Crosby, on all of our short films together, and we developed a technique in how to control natural light. So even though it's completely natural, we're not putting up light stands, we're still shaping it in various ways. So for example, we work really closely with our production designer to choose very specific curtains and lampshades, and we find locations with very specifically around how many windows and what are
what direction the windows are facing.
Yeah, and that allows us to shape how the light's coming through the windows, and then of course the color within the cabin that allows us to get that kind of orangey warm look that we were going for. And then the kind of green blue of dusk and dawn, I think, is completely the kind of natural quality that just exists within the natural settings in which we were filming and works so well with the color palette that we were already envisioning. And it was just a matter of really, again, controlling what our start times were and our end times. So just a crazy example is the barbecue scene where they're skinning the rabbit. That lighting exists for an hour. And so the only way to film that scene was every day we would film one person's shot. And that put a lot of pressure on the actor because it meant, okay, this is your day, you have 1 hour. And then every day we would just pick up where we left off so that we could get that very specific lighting. The Revenant was a reference for lighting because they did something very similar. A lot of that film is shot at dusk and dawn, and there's a very eerie, specific quality that the light has that we felt was very impactful.
I have to tell you something, and I don't want you to freak out.
Why would I freak out?
It's about Dylan.
Okay.
Don't get angry.
And about the rabbit being eaten, could you please elaborate on how did you work with the animals? How did you manage to lure them over, or did you have to direct them somehow?
We thought we were going to be able to direct that wolf, but when the wolf turned up on set, we realized you can't direct a wild animal.
And we weren't waiting for a wild wolf to show up. We worked with a professional wolf wrangler.
But it was so actually what we'd storyboarded that whole sequence, and when the wolf was there, we realized let's just throw away this stuff that we've storyboarded, because the wolf on its own, the things it was doing was so much more interesting and engaging than what we had come up with. So we just and the wolf was doing these amazing things, like the part where the wolf starts to bury the rabbit in the ground. That wasn't scripted. That was just something that we found out on the day. The wolf got full because the trainer was feeding it all these rabbits. So by the end, it just didn't want to eat anymore. And what wolves do when they're full is they bury their food, cover it up, and then they can come back and find it later. And we just shot that, and it ended up being so integral to the film in the end.
And the rabbits are from a farm that's designed specifically for feeding wolves. So these are it's not that the wolf. There was never a moment in which we brought on a real live rabbit. No, it was in fact just like the trainers were already there prepared, because that's part of how the wolf is fed.
I didn't know your sister was such a badass with a knife.
At the end of the movie, I've seen this little note saying no animals were harmed during the making of the movie. No animals were harmed, but I think a man was harmed seriously. How? Well, with that same conflict that I feel, I felt that same conflict when I saw Miriam capturing the spider and saying that it deserves to live. It doesn't, don't kill it, just let it be. But she couldn't let her perpetrator be, and she took her revenge. So how can you talk a bit more about that conflict?
The idea to us that was kind of central to this was the fact that she tries to work things out with Dylan. And there is a moment in the shed where she says, we can work this out. And then he gaslights her and acts as if nothing ever happened. And then when she's confessing to her sister in the lake, again, she's looking for this support, which her sister shuts down. And she's at the point where she feels as if there is nowhere else to turn. And it's in these moments that after you've gone through trauma, where you keep being triggered by it, you keep feeling these feelings over and over, and it becomes so overwhelming that these thoughts of revenge that's when they become incredibly tantalizing, because you just can't find a way to get past it. You don't have any support, and she doesn't have any even acknowledgement that what happened to her did really happen.
And although she's planned her revenge meticulously, you can see that in the film, there are these moments where we see that she's not really capable of going through with it. She decides to take off the bag because she can't kill him this way, but it's too late. And we see how things kind of spiral out of control in a way where she's actually, forced to protect herself. It's now becomes this a question of self-preservation between two people in a very animalistic, primitive sort of way, where now she's forced to use her bare hands. And definitely there's a juxtaposition with the spider, because she doesn't, her impulse to just cover the spider is that she doesn't actually want to have to deal with it. She doesn't want to have to get her hands dirty or actually go through the process of taking action that's actually going to have a consequence. And I think what was important as well is showing you these moments of repulsion. So after she strangles him, we see her emotionally break down. This wasn't something that actually brought her any solace. And when she's draining the blood from the body, we see her vomit, and we see this kind of guttural disgust from her that she is doing this monstrous thing, but she's still human.
Yeah, and I think it's so easy to think about revenge, especially as someone who has gone through trauma. It's really easy and satisfying and tantalizing to think about, well, what if I got my revenge? Then I would feel okay. And it's not easy to go through with it. It's not like it makes everything okay. It's actually the complete opposite, and it's worse than, in so many ways, compounds your trauma and magnifies it.
You've created a reality that is completely different from everyone else's, where you're this saint who gets tricked into doing bad things.
That is exactly what I wanted to ask, whether that revenge was sweet and satisfactory or not, because we clearly see that it isn't. And when she literally vomits after having done that, it's as if she's also disgusted, not by her actual trauma, but also by herself for having taken that decision. And but it's still difficult because we don't really see her being regretful for it. She's going through it still, but she's going through it in a difficult way, not showing regret, but also not showing any satisfaction. And that is tough. That is tough to digest as a viewer.
Hopefully by the end of the film, the last look that you see, I mean, it's obviously the audience is going to interpret that look in different ways, but we're hoping that you see remorse. We're hoping that you see within her a regret, that she's comes to this realization too late in the film where she has completely destroyed her sister's life. She's convinced herself that she was her savior, that she was protecting her sister, but really she now knows that that wasn't really what she was doing.
I mean, I think what we were really keen to do with Miriam's character is we felt that so many of the films that informed us growing up were anti-hero stories, and stories where you don't necessarily like the characters, or they're not doing the right thing. Like in Bad Lieutenant, Harvey Keitel's character is so dark and he does so many awful things, but yet he's still interesting, and you still feel for him in moments. But he never does the right thing. In fact, he just kind of makes his life and his character worse and worse throughout the film.
Yeah, or Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, and we're just not used to seeing female anti-heroes. Women are often portrayed in film as either being morally complete or pure evil, and there's really kind of not a lot of gray. And that was just really interesting to us to try to do something that we're so used to seeing in the space of male characters, but with a female at its core.
Well, it was very, very nice to see how you really placed the female characters in the center. Very specifically, I don't remember the male characters just talking to one another. When they were on the screen, they were always on the screen when women were also present. And we had central conversations with women taking a central spot in those conversations, and that was nice. I wanted to ask about the emotional vulnerability, because masculinity is a very big topic nowadays, right? Same goes for feminism, and defining masculinity is a part of feminism. And we've seen that Caleb is not very emotionally available, because he avoids saying his feelings when Miriam is trying to be intimate with him. She's also a very complicated character, but from his side, we don't really see an action to say what's really weighing on him. And as for the character of Dylan, we see the problem that he is vulnerable, but then with his murder, it's as if his vulnerability dies with him. And that kind of hurts, because you see a man being vulnerable on screen portrayed, and then all of a sudden it's taken away.
Yeah, I mean, we're not used to seeing male vulnerability in this way, specifically in this genre. It's usually the opposite. We're used to seeing scantily clad women who are incredibly vulnerable and sexualized. And in this situation, Miriam's actually the one with all the power. She's stripping him physically of his clothes, and he becomes physically vulnerable in front of her, and then emotionally vulnerable in how he's completely goes through this physical altercation with her, where his preservation as a human being is jeopardized. And I think that was just really important to us to flip that trope on its head and really to show it from a female perspective.
Yeah, I think as well that vulnerability in women is perceived in so many different ways in film. It's perceived quite often as manipulation. And I think it's interesting to perceive how people perceive Dylan's vulnerability, whether it's perceived as pure, or whether it is perceived as partly manipulative as well. It's just an interesting way that we see men and women, that we perceive men and women's vulnerable moments in different ways.
And I think if the full frontal male nudity is shocking in the film, then it should really provoke the question, why is it shocking? Should it be shocking? If it was a woman, would we be shocked? Probably not. So what does that mean about society? What does that mean about the ways in which we're socialized and the way we're taught to think about gender and politics within film.
How did you choose which moments to portray in which way?
We really wanted the violence to feel as real as possible. And a lot of the time, I think in horror, it's in this genre, it's very easy to kind of use editing and to really kind of revel in the gruesomeness of violence. But we were inspired by films that portray really realistic violence that's quite removed, where the camera is in a wide and we're seeing long takes of the violence play out. And even though we're quite far away and it isn't so gory and gruesome and grisly, it's maybe more impactful in a different way, where you're getting kind of that full feeling of what this would really be like to behold.
Yeah, and the irony is, again, within this genre, we're used to seeing lots of gore and blood, and it's really focused and fixated on in a way that I think desensitizes audiences. We become so accustomed to it that it doesn't impact us the way violence should. Violence should be horrific. It should be something that makes your stomach queasy and make you feel really uncomfortable to watch. And that's really what we were trying to capture with the violence. And it had to do with working really closely with our amazing special effects artist, Tamil Shaki, who's really a brilliant artist, and trying to get a level of realism in that body that she created. And then also using cinematography in a way and lighting to really make you feel like you're there in that room and forcing you to watch this act that is repulsive. And then also the vomit. So the vomit in the film is real, and that was something that was really important to Madeline, that we do that, and that it exists in this really long uninterrupted moment where you're, as an audience, you're forced to watch something that's really hard to stomach.
Yeah, I think just because that is really the moment for us where Miriam kind of is in danger of completely losing her grip on reality and humanity. It was so important that the vomit didn't look fake and didn't look comedic. And yeah, it was
and there's something like
kind of impacted her physicality.
Yeah, there's something primitive almost when you see her hunched over like that, like an animal, and you're hearing this horrific guttural responses that she's not performing. Those are just naturally the sounds that are coming out of her body, and you can feel it. It's really gut wrenching as an audience to be in that moment. And again, that I think that coupled with the violence of the blood that you're seeing, hopefully really makes you feel how awful and horrific this act of violence actually is.
I begged you not to, and you did it anyway.
Before the strangling, but she did cover his face with duct tape, right? And then a bag on top of that. And I was really worried about the actor. How did you manage to make sure that he's still comfortable with all of that? And how long did it take you to shoot that one?
Well, Jesse had a little clause in his contract where he just agreed to give up his life for the film. He's no longer here.
When we wrote it, we were like, oh my God, this is so great. She covers his whole head with duct tape and then puts a plastic bag over it. And then we got to actually doing it, and we were like, oh God, now we have to do this.
Yeah. So, I mean, okay, so technically it was complex. We had to break down different techniques in which we would have different things happen at different times. So for example, we would have moments where we knew we could use the duct tape, and then moments where we'd have a special duct tape mask that he could breathe through that you couldn't see, and then moments where there was that plus the bag with a special breathing tube that no one could see, and he sounded like Darth Vader, so we had to like just remove all the audio and redo all the audio because there's no way to make it sound real, but it looked real. And then we had anytime you're faking hyperventilating as an actor, even the strangulation, because of course we want it to feel like he's hyperventilating. You actually your body goes through the same physiological stresses that would naturally happen if you were actually being strangulated. So we had to have an on-set medic who was there to make sure that Jesse was constantly being looked after and that he was safe and that he had extra oxygen if he needed it, so that he felt comfortable.
And we also had a stunt double who was very talented.
Yeah, because the fall back strapped to a chair is quite dangerous. And yeah, so having a trained professional who does that all the time and knows what they're doing. But we shot that, I think, over 5 days, and it was just an enormous thing that we had to break it down into these little parts and spend lots of time rehearsing so that everyone felt really comfortable.
Do you feel like you want to stick to the genre in the future, or do you want to experiment with new influences? Do you want to work again? Do you want to work together again? What's next?
Great. Yeah. I mean, we definitely see ourselves as a writing, directing, producing team. And so we exclusively work together on everything.
Yeah, we've got so many ideas that we don't even have enough ideas to fill our entire lives.
But we're huge fans of just genre in general. So we love horror, we love sci-fi, we love thriller, mystery. And for us, it's really, with this next thing that we do, is really just showcasing the range of things that we're interested in. Because it's very easy, I think, as a filmmaker with your first feature to get pigeonholed. We made this drama horror. Now people might think that's all we want to do. So we're really keen on just developing new things. So we're writing a dark comedy and we're writing a mystery thriller.
Yeah.
But we also have another horror that we want to do, but we're just kind of waiting for the right timing because we want to do a couple things before that one.
Now that we have a lot of time at home, we have a lot of time to watch movies. Is there something that you two would recommend us to watch after watching your film?
Something light.
Okay.
After watching our film, I think people should watch something light.
Yeah, I mean, again, like we love kind of these dark films that are really provocative and challenging. And if you've not seen Catherine Breillat's Fat Girl, it's an older film. I would highly recommend it, though it's disturbing.
Yeah, if you want to go down the path of the violation path, Cachet, Fat Girl,
Fish Tank is another great one. But these are older films, so I don't know if we're really thinking so current. I think that we actually saw
a really inspiring film at Sundance this year called Jockey. If people are looking for totally new things, watch out for that, because that's
a really quiet, feel good, coming of age film about an older man who's kind of at the end of his career. But I just want to also mention, if anyone has the time, there's this really great miniseries on HBO with Mark Ruffalo.
I Know This Much Is True.
Which is
very, very
really
good.
Dark, but so good. I highly recommend it.